Death at Devil's Bridge. Chapter 18. Why are women like telegrams? Because they are so often in advance of the males in intelligence. Punch, 1878. When household prayers had been said, Kate climbed into the pony cart and clocked to Macaroni, the little grey pony that Charles had brought for her. She would have preferred to have ridden her bicycle, but that would not do at all, for she was on her way to Sunday services after she had visited her friend Agnes Lakin, who lived in the nearby village of Gallows Green. In the large wicker basket at her feet were a napkin-wrapped parcel of scones, 2 jars of Mrs. Pratt's red currant marmalade, and a fine cheese. It was still early morning, and there was quite some time before the service would begin. She and Agnes planned to have a bit of breakfast and a comfortable visit together. Some time before, Agnes Lakin, the then Agnes Oliver, had suffered a dreadful tragedy. Her husband Arthur Oliver had been murdered and her daughter Betsy abducted. It had only been through the combined efforts of Charles and Kate, at that time unmarried, that the perpetrators of the crimes had been apprehended and brought to justice. After a suitable period of mourning, Agnes had married Charles's friend Ned Lakin, and the friendship between Kate and Agnes had flourished. Kate looked forward eagerly to the mornings they spent together in Lakin's cottage, where Agnes was awaiting the birth of Ned's child, due early next year. The hamlet of Gallows Green lay on the slope of a green hill above the River Stour. Its 20 or so cottages, an inn, a grocery, and a smithy were arranged on 4 sides of the rectangular green. One of the cottages was the Lakin cottage, whitewashed with thatch-roofed red brick chimney and diamond-paned windows with green shutters. The dooryard was bright with autumn asters and late-blooming daisies, and a pot of bright red geraniums stood beside the door. Jemima Puddleduck was there too, preening her white feathers under a fragrant rosemary bush. The white duck received Kate's stroking with equanimity, for the 2 were old friends, Jemima being Betsy's pet dog. The pretty brown-haired Agnes greeted Kate with pleasure, and the 2 women settled themselves in front of the kitchen fire with a china pot of tea and a plate of scones and red currant marmalade, the cheese having been set aside for Ned's tea. Kate enjoyed Agnes's small kitchen, where a red and blue braided rug warmed the stone floor, a casement window let in the sun, and an ancient clock marked the hour with a musical chime. The conversation immediately turned to the events of the day and evening before, and Kate told Agnes all that she had not already heard from Ned, about the angry exchange in her drawing-room the night before, and Lady Marston's unexpected after-dinner arrival in the pony cart. Then Agnes told Kate 1 or 2 things that she did not yet know, that Ned had interviewed Jessup until late the night before, and felt that he was innocent of any complicity in the motor-car crash. Jessup had confessed, however, that his gig and his mother's bonnet, in fact, the grand sum of £30, had come from the Honourable Charles Rolls. "Rolls!" Kate exclaimed. "That's absurd. Why should he do such a thing?" She frowned. "I don't believe it. Something is not right here, Agnes." Ned questioned that claim as well, Agnes said, buttering the scone. "But where else could Jessup's come by such a sum? They are a poorest job. Mr. Rolls must have given it out of kindness of his heart to assuage Jessup's grief." Kate did not think that such a thing would occur to Charles Rolls, especially since the payment of money to the dead man's family would be judged by those who had heard of it to be an admission of guilt. Rolls was certainly clever enough to think that. "I believe," she replied thoughtfully, "that I shall try to learn where that money came from." "If you do so, you shall be ahead of Ned," Agnes said. "He was puzzling his brain over the same question this morning. How do you think to discover it?" "Why, from Mrs. Jessup herself," Kate said. "Where else?" She stirred a lump of sugar into her tea. "I understand from cook that the lady is staying for a few days in the village with her cousin Mrs. Crosby. After services, I believe I shall call there to pay my condolences to the widow." "Your way to Dedham will take you past Devil's Bridge," Agnes remarked. "Ned went there early this morning." "And Charles went there to take photographs," Kate said, glancing at the clock. "He must have gone by this time too. I suppose there will be precious little for me to see." As it turned out, however, there was a great deal to see. When Kate arrived at Devil's Bridge, the coroner had just taken his leave and ridden off. Lawrence and P.C. Gaskell were using the team to drag the wreckage of the Daimler out of the ravine, while Charles, on his hands and knees, was scouring the area where the motor car had rested. Kate looked around, remembering her dream and feeling a little frisson of recognition. Two situations that were amazingly similar, the dusty lane, the hill, the bridge. Closing her mind to the recollection of the faceless figure of her dream, and glad for her stout boots and sensible skirt, she climbed down the steep hill to the place where the wreck had been. "I thought you had gone to Sunday service," Charles said, getting to his feet. "I'm on my way. I stopped for breakfast with Agnes." She glanced around. "Whatever you looking for?" "The left brake shoe is missing," Charles replied. "A wooden block about 6 inches long and 3 wide, covered in leather. The other crucial parts have been located, but that one has yet to turn up." He rubbed his hand through his brown hair, anxious. "It is the most important of all. It must be found. Why not enlist Lawrence in that task? He is familiar with every part of the car. He would know what to look for." "Because," Charles said in a low voice, "I have not yet cleared him of suspicion." "But you can't think that Lawrence had anything to do with the crash," Kate exclaimed. "Why would he?" Then she fell silent. Why would Lawrence tamper with the Daimler? The answer was quite simple, really. He had meant to destroy the motor car so that he and Amelia would not have to accompany it to London. "Oh, I hope that is not true," she said after a moment. "Yes," Charles said. "I have kept a close eye on him all morning and asked P.C. Gaskell to do the same. I'm quite sure that neither of them have found the missing brake." Kate turned to look up the hill, her attention caught by the trail of broken grasses that led up to the large horse-chestnut tree. Following her glance, Charles said, "Albrecht crawled up to that tree. Just found him there." Kate shivered, thinking once more of her dream and of the dying man's agony. What had been in his mind as he dragged himself up that hill on his knees and elbows? Had he feared death? Had he hoped for rescue? Musing, she walked slowly up the hill and stood for a moment beside the tree, imagining how the handsome, arrogant young German had laid there, his life and strength and self-confidence ebbing away, leaving only the ragged breath, the unendurable pain, the light dying into the dark. As she stood, her eyes suddenly caught a rectangular object half buried in a mound of brown leaves. Without touching it, she went bent over for a closer look. It was a narrow wooden block, 6 inches long or so, faced with leather. The leather covering seemed to be impregnated with a greasy red substance. The back was splintered as if the block had been forcibly struck from its securing mechanism. "Charles!" she called and waved. A moment later, Charles confirmed that she had indeed discovered the missing brake shoe. "It must have broken off in the impact and Albrecht found it," he said, "then carried it with him up the hill to this spot." He picked up the wooden block and sniffed it. "But why?" Kate asked wonderingly. "It would have cost him some effort when the poor man had precious little to spare. Why did he do it?" "Because it proved a theory of his of the cause of the crash," Charles said, "and he wanted to be sure that it was found." He held out the block to her. "Do you recognize this odor, Kate?" She sniffed it as well and pulled back. "Phew!" she exclaimed. "What is it?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever it is, it may be the same substance I saw on Albrecht's fingers last night." "On his fingers?" She frowned, studying the leather-covered block in Charles's hand. "But the brake is greasy, Charles. Is that what caused the crash?" "Very likely," Charles replied. "The right brake caught and held, the left brake slipped, and the motor car spun out of control. But let me show you something else." And he took her to where his canvas bag lay, and pulled out the small crockery pot, its lid fastened on with a metal bail, and opened it. "Smell," he commanded. "It's the same stuff," she said, when she had sniffed it. She looked at the jar, frowning. "Charles, that pot, I recognize it. It is one of the set of 3 little mustard pots Eleanor sent from us from France some weeks ago." She turned it over and pointed to the tiny word Dijon stamped on the bottom. "You see? But that awful substance inside is most certainly not mustard." "Are you sure of that, Kate?" Charles' voice was tense. "That this pot came from our kitchen, I mean." Kate, suddenly sick at heart, knew what he was thinking, that Amelia could have taken the mustard pot from the Bishop's Keep kitchen to the Quigley cottage, where Lawrence found it and filled it with the grease that ended up on the Daimler's brake. "But I'm not absolutely sure, I suppose," she said hesitantly, even though she felt sure. "I shall have to see whether Mrs. Pratt can produce all 3 pots. Where did you get it?" "I found it hidden in the gondola yesterday, under a pile of ropes." "In the gondola?" Kate looked at him perplexed. I don't understand." But the moment the words came out of her mouth, she thought she did understand after all. Lawrence had had a full charge of the balloon on several occasions in the last few days. If he wanted to cache something where he could readily retrieve it, he might have thought the gondola to be a handy hiding place. "Oh, dear, she said sadly. Charles met her eyes. Yes, he said. Oh dear indeed. After the service that morning, Kate walked across the green churchyard to Mrs. Crosby's house. Kate had been raised a Roman Catholic, but the nearest priest was several miles away across the River Stour at East Berkholtz, and she regularly attended services at St. Mary the Virgin on High Street in Dedham. The walls of the old church, which dated from 1492, were built of grey stone from Caen, while the opposing tower was faced with the local knapped flint. In the tower hung the bells, 5 of which had been cast before 1552, as Vicar Table was fond of boasting. But because of Warden Russell's fear of damage to the tower, the bells had only been chimed for the past few years. Not wrong. A sad loss to the village, the parishioners lamented. A solicitation, not the first according to parish history, was under way to repair the tower. The small grey cottage belonged to the village school, which kept it for use of the teacher. She was Miss Estelle Crosby, sister to the apothecary and cousin to the widow Jessup. Kate's knock was answered by the girl of all work, and she was ushered into the small, chilly front parlour. A coal fire was lit in the fireplace, and Mrs. Jessup sat close beside it, her lap covered with a shawl, her slippered feet on the fender. Mrs. Jessup jumped to her feet, dropping the shawl, and ran away to fetch her cousin, who had also just returned from services. The two ladies, quite flustered, accepted Kate's apologies for calling on a Sunday, and hurriedly produced an embroidered cloth, a pot of tea, and 3 cups, a chipped china plate filled with sticky buns. Mrs. Crosby, clearly sensible of the honour of her ladyship's visit, remarked more than once how good it was that of Lady Catherine to call on her and her poor bereaved cousin, and the widow herself several times repeated how grateful she was for her ladyship's magnanimous offer of loan of a pony cart, although of course her poor son Tom, fatherless now, and broken-hearted, was now possessed of a gig, so that she would not be required to trespass on her lady's extraordinary kindness. They had already heard of the wreck of Lord Marston's motor car on the previous day, and were anxious to know if her ladyship had any news of the tragedy. But Kate played innocent to any knowledge of the crash, and turned their attention back to themselves by mentioning how satisfied she was to find them both in such fine health, which gratified them both. "Another bit of bun, if it please your ladyship?" asked Miss Crosby, offering the china plate so that her hand hit the chipped edge. "Oh, do," urged the widow Jessup, and removed the striped knit tea cosy to peer into the pot. "And have another cup of tea as well, me lady. It's Sunday, and there's a plenty." Kate obliged, and the 3 ladies were quite companionable for a few moments, sipping their tea and munching their sticky buns and speaking cosily of village matters. Mrs. Crosby, who seemed to know everything that was going on in the village, regaled them both with a report of Mrs. Gotemurer's 7th child born that very morning, a boy at last after 6 girls, and as fine and lusty a boy as ever was seen, black-haired and sweetly plump as a baby pig. Of Rachel Elam's dahlias winning the first prize of the fete of the day before, when everyone knew that Mrs. Go-to-beds were by far the nicer, and Tom Whipple's arrest on disorderly conduct charges, and of Squire Thornton's generous payment of his bail. And then Kate remarked that she had noticed Mrs. Jessup's quite lovely bonnet, as that lady had walked on the High Street the week before, and begged if it were not too great a trial for the widow to be allowed to see it. Once the bonnet was on the table before him, in all its splendour of black crape and black velvet ribbon, it was quite natural of Kate to praise the widow's fine taste in millinery, and to inquire where such a fine bonnet might be purchased, and to listen for the widow's next remark, to which quite naturally revealed what she came to hear. "Of course," Widow Jessup sighed, reverently wrapping the bonnet in tissue preliminary to replacing it in a cardboard bonnet box. "I could never in 100 years have afforded such extravagance if it hadn't been for the squire, bless his soul." "Nor Tommy's fine gig," observed the widow's cousin. "Nor Tommy's gig," agreed the widow. "Nor Whipple his bail," said Kate thoughtfully. "Oh, aye," said the widow. "The squire's been a tower of strength in he has, and generous beyond telling." She coloured and added hastily, "But I shouldn't say so. He's asked Tom and me particularly not to." Disregarding that last remark, Kate said warmly, "I'm so glad to know that it was the squire who helped you. I had heard it said around the village that it was Mr. Rolls." The widow reddened. "Well," she said slowly, "Mr. Rolls," sniffed her indignant cousin. "I'd like to know why he'd want to help. Mr. Rolls, indeed." Now, Stella, the widow said, nervously turned her bonnet in her hand, remember what the squire says. We must not hold grudges. She looked at Kate. The squire says it would be good if it were believed that Mrs. Roll helped us out, not to lie, of course, but what's past is past, as Jessup itself says, and people would be more willing to forgive if they thought the gentlemen were willing to pay. Miss Crosby sighed heavily. You're a real Christian soul, Tildy. She appealed to Kate. Ain't she, milady? A real Christian soul, as is the squire, bless his heart. Didn't he go and stand bail for poor Whipple too? You don't hear of Mr. Roll standing bail for nobody, I don't suppose. The smile was distinctly uncharitable. After a few moments, Kate repeated her praise of the bonnet and added a few words in favour of the sticky buns. Taking her leave, she departed into the crisp, refreshing outdoor air. But by the invigorating chill did much to clear Kate's head, it did little to lift her spirits. She had got the intelligence that she came for, but it left her with so many more questions. Why had Squire Thornton involved himself in this affair which was truly none of his business? What had he to do with the Jessops, or with Whipple, or with any of it? It was very confusing. But the sadness that most heavily burdened Kate as she rode along had nothing to do with Squire Thornton. Her concern and distress lay much closer to home, in the rose-covered cottage at the foot of the lane. She could believe that Lawrence Quigley had intended to disable the Daimler, although she felt sure he had not intended to kill the driver. But dead was dead, or at least so a jury would most likely reckon. Poor Lawrence, what would become of him, and what would happen to Amelia, sweet, loving Amelia, if her husband were arrested and brought to the dock for the death of Wilhelm Albrecht? Would she bear it? What would she do? Kate clucked to the grey pony, hurrying him homeward, wondering whether there was any way that she could help.